Welcome into our Packers News Camp Chat alongside Pete Doherty. I am Olivia Reiner. For the first time since Thursday, the Packers were fully padded. A certain group got to do something we haven't seen in quite some time. That's right, live tackling. We'll get into everything from camp today in just a moment. Before we begin, I want to remind you, you can be a part of our conversation. As always, if you're over on Facebook, leave us a comment or a question down in the chat. Pete and I will address some of those toward the end of our conversation today. First, let's get into some COVID-19 updates from around the league. This morning, the NFL announced that a number of Saturday's COVID-19 tests returned false positives. They were all out of the same lab in New Jersey. The Packers were one of the teams affected by the false positives. However, head coach Matt LaFleur said that while a few players tested positive, they were able to administer rapid tests Sunday morning before practice. Those tests came back negative, and the Packers were able to practice as scheduled. Pete, why was dealing with this issue so important for the Packers right now before the regular season starts?
Well, they're not getting a ton of practice in before camp, or at least they're not getting preseason games in. And one of the big things I think they wanted to see, which we saw in that final period today, was actual tackling by the young guys. So if they had not practiced, if there are too many guys that had to miss, or some of the young guys that had to miss, they would have missed out on seeing that live action. And just a lot of practice reps. They do have 8 practices in 9 days, which you'd never see in a normal preseason. I think in the normal preseason, they can't practice more than 3 days in a row. So I'm guessing tomorrow is going to be much lighter than today, and then Tuesday they're in Lambeau, so that'll probably be a lot of contact on that one.
The Packers have had 5 players so far on the COVID-19 reserve list. To be on that list means that you either tested positive for COVID-19 or you came into contact with someone who tested positive. For tight end Jay Sternberger, he confirmed today that he had contracted COVID-19. He was mostly asymptomatic. However, he did miss a good portion of the acclimation period heading into these practices. Pete, how has Sternberger looked acclimating himself, getting back into the swing of things here in practice?
Looks okay. I can't say he's jumped off the field as somebody who's just, playing great. But he's had a few catches. Today, the one play that I remember most is he did an out pattern, and Love threw just a little high, a little behind him, and it skipped off his fingertips. They both probably a little responsible for that not connecting. He does appear to be, which we saw last season, a very willing blocker. Not always good, but very willing, which is a huge part of becoming a good blocker, is that you're willing to stick your nose in there and really work on it. So that, I think the Packers have to consider that promising. Right now, just going by kind of the eyeball test, I would think Robert Tonyan is playing better, and I would assume ahead of him in playing time if they were to have a game this weekend.
Sternberger getting his feet under him as he gets reset here in camp. Everyone is getting acclimated, especially some of these younger players, especially what Matt LaFleur has called the developmental group. With this group in particular, they had a live period toward the end of practice where they were able to actually tackle each other on both sides of the ball. Head coach Matt LaFleur has implemented these types of periods for some of the less experienced players so they can show their stuff in light of having no preseason games. It allows both the coaches and the scouts to evaluate these players. Pete, who showed up during this live tackling period today?
I guess, just thinking back, one play that stood out was A.J. Dillon had a run where he had a stiff arm on one of the defensive backs. I'm forgetting who right now. But basically put the guy down and picked up, 6, 7, 8 more yards probably on that play. Kamal Martin had a play where he stuffed a run in the backfield. It was, as LaFleur said, it was a blitz play, and he timed it perfectly and got in there. He's really jumped off the field. It's pretty easy to say he's been the best rookie so far in camp. Those are probably the 2 guys. Randy Ramsey stuffed a run. Ty Summers on a check down to Dillon, basically got a pretty good hit on him just after he caught the ball. Those are the plays that jumped out to me.
Speaking of Summers, he spoke to the media today, and as someone who highly benefited from preseason games last season, he was able to show out and ultimately make an impact on the team, granted mostly special teams. He acknowledged that these live tackling sessions are especially important for some of the younger players if they want to make a case for themselves for either the 53-man roster or the 16-man practice squad. Now, it wasn't just the less experienced players that got to show out a little bit today. Aaron Rodgers and his group also had an opportunity in camp to show their stuff. That was with the 2-minute drill. The premise of this drill, the Packers offense had 1 minute and 15 seconds plus a timeout to get within field goal range from their own 25-yard lines. Pete, how did Rodgers and his group perform in the 2-minute drill?
Really sharp. You saw it too. So I added up the stats. I think he was 5 for 6 for 47 yards, not counting 3 spikes. So he had only the 1 timeout to work with, so converted 2 third downs, one on a seam pass to Tanyan, and the other on he started to scramble up the middle and then did a backhand flip to Jamal Williams. They got the field goal. I think they got the last spike with, what was there, like 4 or 5 seconds left, I think, which is about what you're looking for the 47-yard field goal. One last completion to Jake Kumaro that probably picked up an extra 6 yards, got him a little closer. It was just a really well-run, very methodical, simple, but well-run 2-minute drill to win a game because they were down. The scoreboard said 24-22, so the field goal won it for them.
Got within field goal range. Mason Crosby and the special teams unit able to seal the deal for the Packers offense in the drill. The Packers were able to have a productive day on the field. However, they were down a few important players. There was cornerback Jair Alexander, who was out yet again, offensive lineman Rick Wagner, outside linebacker Zadarius Smith, and defensive lineman Montravius Adams. Especially for cornerback Jair Alexander, namely him, I'll pick on him for a moment. His absence allows some of the less experienced cornerbacks to get on the field, including Josh Jackson. Jackson has allowed some plays throughout camp here and there. However, today he was able to break up a couple of passes in the end zone. Pete, what does Josh Jackson have to show out there during this camp in order to show he's capable of making an impact on the defense?
It would help if, one of his strengths at Iowa was turning the ball over, getting interceptions. He hasn't had an interception yet. That would help him for sure. He's done okay. He's been up and down. There were several completions against him. Rodgers, Devontae Adams hooked up for, probably about a 45, 50-yard touchdown against him on a corner route, and Adams, was coming kind of right on our side of the field, had him beat by a good, 3 yards, I would say. The really bad plays, I think, is something that he has to eliminate. He does look like he's playing better than he did last year, but they desperately need him because really after, with Shannon Sullivan being their nickel guy, and even he's a kind of an unproven player as far as if he's going to, as a full-time player, as we see today with Alexander being out, there's going to be injuries in the secondary, and they're going to need somebody to come in and give them good snaps for a week, 2 weeks, could be a month that somebody's out.
Jackson certainly has an opportunity here in this camp to prove that he can be a consistent player on defense. We'll see if the coaches identify that within him. Let's move into some of our questions and comments here on Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Jason says that he heard about Rodgers hitting a 60-yard dime to Devontae Adams in practice today. It seemed like Aaron Rodgers was going for some of those deeper balls, some of those explosive plays, particularly attempting to connect more with Devontae Adams. He was only able to successfully do it a couple of times. However, one of those did result in a 60-yard touchdown completion from Rodgers to Adams. How important is it for the Packers to really work on, especially for the offense, really cultivating some of those explosive plays?
Yeah, because when you think back to last year, they missed a few last season, and in fact, he missed Adams on one earlier today in practice. Would have been, a 50-yard touchdown or so, and he just overthrew him by just a little bit, skipped just barely off of Adams' fingertips or just over him. And you can see Rodgers was unhappy with himself after that play. But big plays win games. And when that's one of the things that the really good quarterbacks do is when they get those chances, they strike, and Adams got himself wide open against Jackson, and they put that one on a dime. He also hit Kumaro the very next snap. He got Randy Ramsey to jump off sides, got a free play, and Kumaro smoked, I think it was Sunderland on a post pattern, got wide open. Rodgers hit him, and that was another 45-yard touchdown, back-to-back plays.
Big gains there for both Adams and, as Jim refers to him, touchdown Jesus, Jake Kumaro. We'll move on to a question from John. John asks, is wide receiver pickup Reggie Begelton getting any reps with Aaron Rodgers? Pete, I know we're not technically supposed to speak about who he's getting reps with or exactly where he is on the depth chart, but what opportunities have you seen Begelton getting so far throughout training camp?
He's getting snaps. I'm trying to think, everybody rotates through, even with Rodgers. I think they all get an occasional shot. I can't say that I've noticed Begelton getting a lot of snaps with Rodgers, so I'm guessing most of his have been with Boyle and Jordan Love. I can't say he's jumped off the field. Marquez Valdez-Scantling had a couple of good practices back-to-back, seemed to help himself, maybe put himself in position to push Lazard for the starting job opposite Davante Adams. And I don't know what they would do if those are their top three receivers, if they'd put Lazard in the slot, I would guess, because Scantling's really not a slot guy. So that would be interesting to see if they end up being their top three.
Yeah, we'll see how the Packers decide to configure their wide receivers going into the start of the regular
Adams
season.
can also play slot too, so I'm sure they like to move him around, so I'm sure they would mix him in there too.
Davante Adams, possibly in the slot. Who knows exactly who is going to start there. Something to keep an eye on through camp. Marcel, our friend from Germany, asks, did the running backs have some pass protection drills today? And if so, how is rookie running back A.J. Dillon looking? Seems like they get some pass protection drills, maybe not every day, but a good portion of practices throughout training camp. The running backs work in a little bit more on pass protection. How have they looked so far, whether in these individual drills or out there in team?
They've done it a couple times this year. I remember under McCarthy, they would do it once, maybe twice the entire camp. And they do it during the same time that the offensive linemen and defensive linemen are doing one-on-ones. So I glanced over a couple times a few days ago and I saw Dillon, because I was watching the linemen. I saw Dillon whiff going against, I think it was Kamal Martin. So I know that he did struggle there. I don't know if they did it today. I was locked in on the offensive defensive linemen. I don't know what you were watching in that period, if you happen to notice if they were doing the linebacker blitz drill.
I didn't watch that, but I did see them doing some individual drills with each other, doing some hand placement stuff and whatnot. So they're working on it. We'll move on to, let's see, I had a question here from Timmy. Timmy asks, is Josh Jackson going back to cornerback and Darnell Savage and Adrian Amos to start at safety? Our Tom Silverstein asked Josh Jackson today when he was available to the media if he had been practicing at multiple positions throughout camp, or leading up to camp, I should say. And Jackson said that he's mostly focused right now at cornerback. And from what we've been able to see, how he's been utilized in 11-on-11s, it looks like he will be staying at cornerback.
It does. He's been pretty high up in the rotation. It'll be interesting to see if he holds that spot. He's played okay. I wondered going into camp if he would be a lost cause. Then he had a rough first day, which really made you wonder. But he's recovered and played better. So we'll see if he can hold a spot where he, with one injury, if he's on the field in the nickel or dime.
Yep, he's certainly an opportunity in camp for Jackson to shine now with Alexander sidelined for who knows how much longer. Let's move on to John. John realizes that this might be a long shot, so brace yourself, everyone. He asks, would it be worth it for the Packers to call Earl Thomas's agent now that he is no longer with the Baltimore Ravens? Pete, how likely is it that the Packers would have any interest in Thomas?
I would think highly unlikely, too expensive for an old safety. He was supposed to make $10 million this year. Now that's going to be up in the air whether he gets that or not. There's probably going to be arbitration. They need to save as much money as they can to pay. They've got some big free agents coming up after signing Kenny Clark. They still have Bakhtiari, Aaron Jones. Corey Lindsley, Kevin King. That's 4 guys. I don't think they'll be able to get all of them. They need cap room. I'd be really surprised if they made a move on Earl Thomas.
Unlikely from Pete. It would be an expensive move, especially when the Packers are looking to save some cap space heading into 2020 when their list of free agents is going to be pretty substantial. Let's move on to Marcel. Marcel asked if there were any new injuries to players from practice due to the intensity level of today's practice. Today's practice was about 2 hours and 15 minutes. It was a long one. We did see safety Raven Green leave practice early. He came back to observe practice from the sideline. He had his helmet, which would indicate that he was able to go back in to drills and 11-on-11s today. However, he never did. So we don't know exactly what's up with Green. However, good sign that he did return to practice today.
And Runyon dropped out right near the end in that last period. That was the young guys, the live period. You got to say they've been through a week of camp. I mean, you read Pro Football Talk and you see these guys dropping on other teams. Some guys getting ACL injuries or torn Achilles, pretty serious injuries, and they haven't had any. I mean, Zadarius Smith is on the sidelines every day and moving around. Jair Alexander today, in between periods, was working with Kevin King, where Alexander was running the start of routes and King was working on his drops. So Alexander wasn't going 100%, but he was running. So his injury, at least outside looking in, doesn't look very serious. So far, I would think the Packers have to feel pretty good about how they've weathered the first week and a day of camp.
Especially good news given the fact that they pushed back the start of on-field practices because they wanted players to get acclimated and avoid some of those soft tissue injuries, which they've been able to do so far. Let's move on to Jason. Jason asks, how is inside linebacker Ty Summers looking? As I mentioned, Summers, plural Summers. Earlier in our show, I mentioned how he was one of the players who highly benefited from having preseason games last season. One of the reasons he was able to make the team is because he was able to make some big splash plays in preseason games last season. This past season, he mostly contributed on special teams. However, now with Christian Kirksey looking like the surefire starter at inside linebacker, there is a job open next to him. There will be competition for that job from players like Oren Burks and even 2020 draft pick Kamal Martin. How likely is it that someone like Ty Summers will be able to beat out some of those other players for that job?
He's in the running, right? I mean, right now, I'd say Martin's might have the best shot at anybody. He's looked the best of them. Summers, I still wonder how good he'll be at taking on blocks at linebacker. Martin just looks like a bigger, longer player for handling blocks, the offensive lineman getting to the second level. But Summers he looks fast. There was a couple plays on Saturday where there was one where he did a really deep drop, really good coverage. He's just sprinted back fast once he saw it was a play action pass. I think it was Alan Lazard was doing kind of a stop route over the middle, and he cut that passing lane off, and Rodgers had to check it down.
Summers showing out early in camp. A couple more weeks to go before the Packers have to make their cutdowns. They have a lot of choices to mull over, a lot of competition at different positions, including inside linebacker, just to name one of them. Packers News will be covering it all the way until the start of the regular season, and we'll continue to cover through the regular season as well. Make sure you're checking out PackersNews.com for all of your Packers coverage. Follow us on social media. We have lots of updates throughout camp over on all of our accounts as well. That is going to do it for us today, everyone. We will be back tomorrow for yet another live stream. If we did not answer your question today, come back tomorrow, same time, same place. I guarantee you we will have some more time to chat about everything on your mind as it relates to the Packers. For Pete,